Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 21st of December 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by David Scott and Vanessa Beeley. This will be the last UK Column News for 2018. What have we got?
Well, we're going to start straight off with Donald Trump. Of course, he was pushing this tweet out a couple of days ago. After historic victories against ISIS, it's time to bring our great young people home. And he followed that with this one yesterday, saying it's hard to believe that Lindsey Graham would be against saving soldiers' lives and billions of dollars. Why are we fighting for our enemy Syria by staying and killing ISIS for them, Russia and Iran and other locals? Time to focus on our country and bring our youth back where they belong. Well, his decision to bring US troops back from Syria and then more recently from Afghanistan has resulted in the Defence Secretary Jim Mattis quitting, according to Reuters and others, saying that really he was clashing with Donald Trump on various defence policies, and it was really time for him to go because you have a right, he said, to a Secretary of Defence whose views are better aligned with yours on these and other subjects. I believe it's right for me to step down from my position. So let me bring Vanessa Beeley onto the programme straight away. Welcome to the programme, Vanessa. What are your initial thoughts on Trump's decision to withdraw from Syria? He seems to be saying the reason that he's doing it is because he views Syria as an enemy and he doesn't really see why he should be helping Syria with their problems. Is that what it is, or is there something else going on?
You know, I do love the utter chaos that comes as a result of Trump's announcements, whatever they are. It's just wonderful. I mean, Mattis has resigned. And the world just collapses into chaos with one tweet from President Trump. I mean, you know, from that perspective alone, we have to kind of admire the Trump effect. I don't know. I mean, I think it's very interesting. It's created a very sort of interesting situation with people discussing it from a number of angles. I think the proof, and actually, as part of the UN Security Council mission, which we'll come on to shortly, the Russian ambassador made a very salient point. He said, well, you know, we will respond on this question when it actually happens. And I think we've had previous announcements like this by Trump that have then obviously been followed by an actual increase in American presence and the fortification of their bases on Syrian territory. But this is a slightly different situation with the Turks hovering on the border, of course, of the northeast to try and eradicate what they perceive as the Kurdish threat. It's a very difficult one to call, and certainly from my perspective, I agree with the Russian ambassador. It's a waiting time now to see whether the US will actually fulfill Trump's announcement. I think Trump's announcement has obviously gone against the entire military-industrial complex, the Israeli lobby, the deep state. You know, it's thrown a spanner in the works of years of planning geopolitically in the region. So I'm not saying that Trump's desire is not genuine.
Sorry, let's just talk about that a little bit, because of course the US is in Syria as an implementation of Obama's policy. Trump has said even during the run up to the 2016 election that he would take US troops out. We've seen, as you say, lots of toing and froing between him and the Pentagon over whether they should be there or not over the last 2 years, and until the midterm elections, he certainly didn't seem to have the desire to go quite so forcefully up against the Pentagon as he seems to have done in the last day or so. And the question is, where does this leave the Kurds? Because, of course, the United States mainly, well, are they exclusively operating in Kurdish areas? Is that correct?
The Kurds?
Yes. The US are mainly in Kurdish areas, right?
No, they're mainly in Syria, Mike. But yes, they're in areas that have been occupied by the US using the Kurds as a proxy, power multiplied by the US. But we should not forget the fact that this is all Syrian territory. I think the Kurds, if you imagine that the actual number of Kurds inside Syria is less than probably now 5% of the population, of that 5%, only a very small percent comprise the actual separatists that have allowed themselves to be used or instrumentalized by the US and by Israel. We shouldn't forget that either. So I think now what we will see, of course, they will perceive that there is a threat of Turkish reprisals against the Kurdish communities, and they will ramp up their desire to negotiate with Damascus, which is a very positive aspect of this entire potential withdrawal of the US troops. The Kurds will not now maintain the position of separatism. That's my belief. They will come running to Damascus for help to defend them against the Turks. And the last thing that the Syrian government and its allies want, of course, is for Turkey to increase its occupation of Syria and its annexation of Syrian territory by carrying out a military campaign against the Kurds.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Now, we're going to come on to some other stuff in a second, but just before we do, David, let me bring you onto the programme at this point. How do you view Trump's decision? Is this genuine, or is he playing games again?
I think it's genuine. It's genuine from Trump, but it's quite clearly cuts across all of the other interests. And this is the re-emergence of the drain the swamp type Trump that's come in and out of focus over the last couple of years. Because remember, he acquiesced to a completely pointless missile strike on Syria, something we commented on the column. But the general thrust has been he is not on program. He's not on message with the interests that are looking to destabilize Syria and other countries. And the chaos it's caused is just delightful. I see that Harrods here said with just one tweet, President Trump has ruined all of the plans of his advisors and generals, and amen to that. And I also particularly enjoyed the CNN coverage of this. They denounced his apparently impulsive decision that shook the world, and this showed little sign of the nuanced consideration and confounded his top advisors. So therefore, there you go. In CNN, the destabilization of one country after another and the promotion of civil war in Syria is nuanced consideration.
Yes, but Brian, the timing of this is interesting.
Well, I find the timing very interesting, because if you want to time an announcement to bring the troops home, you choose Christmas, because this is a very, very emotive time of the year for service families. So if Trump is making this as a sort of quick, what do I describe it as, a quick win, a quick buck, he's chosen a time of year where the backlash, should he not deliver, I think will be phenomenal. And I also just add that yesterday I was able to read a document called Providing for the Common Defence, the assessment and recommendations of the National Defence Strategy Commission. Now, this was a group of people reporting really on the state of defence in the USA, and the report was a complete tale of woe. It was a tale of woe with the Navy, with the Air Force, with nuclear defence, with missile systems. It even said that we can't recruit the number of military personnel we need because they're either too fat, or they're not schooled enough, or their maths is insufficient. So that document says there are immense problems within the US military. And I think, David, although you've said, what the generals might want, I think there's a lot of American generals starting to reassess the sheer strain on the American military at the moment.
Okay, well, let's move on to the white helmets here. And well, first of all, Vanessa, we've got a little bit of video here with subtitles. This is regarding the white helmets. What are the Jordanians saying about the white helmets?
Well, basically, I mean, this was a very interesting statement that was made by a Member of Parliament, Tarek Kouri, who you can see in the video. And basically, he is arguing, he was actually part of the Jordanian delegation that came to Syria after the opening of the Nasib border, the trade border between Syria and Jordan, which was opened a couple of months ago. And basically what he's saying is that the white helmets who came in to Jordan through an Israeli special evacuation are effectively all members of armed groups, even those, and I've actually spoken with Mr. Kouri very briefly since I published this video, and I actually asked him to confirm, did he believe that all of the white helmets who left Syria were evacuated by Israel into Jordan and then resettled, of course, into the UK in particular, but into Canada, and I can't remember if it's Germany, no, it's France, I think. Or Holland. But basically what he said was that in his belief, all of those white helmet evacuees were members of illegal armed groups inside Syria. There are a number of them still remaining in Jordan who were obviously too extreme to be resettled in the UK, etc. And what he's asking for is for those members to be extradited from Jordan because he doesn't want such unwelcome extremist group members on Jordanian soil, and he wants them extradited to Syria to be put on trial by the Syrian government. Now, what is extraordinary about this, what is quite extraordinary about this is that Jordan, of course, had a history in the Syrian conflict of providing arms and equipment to the armed groups. So for a Jordanian MP to be making this statement, this is quite a brave and courageous stand against also Jordan's policy of supporting Britain's policy in Syria.
Okay, and you mentioned the United Nations earlier on. There was a meeting in the UN yesterday. Who organised that meeting and what was it about?
Well, it was a meeting organised by the Russian mission, but it also included Bashar al-Jafri, Ambassador Bashar al-Jafri, who's the permanent representative of the Syrian Arab Republic to the UN in New York. It was organised by the Russian mission. It was a roundtable discussion on the activities of the White Helmets in Syria, and a presentation was put forward by Maxim Grigoriev. I think he's CEO of the Foundation of the Study of Democracy. But what was very interesting is that about a year ago, I had actually spoken to them about the potential of white helmet involvement in organ trafficking. And Grigoriev has done an excellent report, a very comprehensive report into the activities of the White Helmets, and he has proven that it does include organ trafficking by taking the testimonies of civilians whose relatives were lightly injured. The White Helmets took them for what they presumed to be medical treatment. The bodies were brought back with all of the organs removed. He's interviewed, I believe it's well over, I think he has over 500 testimonies in total. A number of them were shown last night in the UN Security Council, including testimony from doctors about the organ trafficking in East Aleppo when it was under occupation of Nusra Front and other extremist groups, and the White Helmets. So this is an incredibly, one, vindicating, two, damning report on the White Helmets, which of course the British government is still funding. They gave 1.8 million to Mayday Rescue last month, despite the fact that the Netherlands government has withdrawn funding from both the White Helmets and Mayday Rescue because they can't offer guarantees of not financing terrorist groups inside Syria. So, you know, the British government is becoming more and more isolated in its protectionism of its own intelligence asset, of course. You know, the White Helmets was established by British intelligence, by a former British intelligence operative, James Mesurier.
Vanessa, this is something that you and I have been talking about for quite some time, and one of the points that you've been making to me over the months is that anywhere that the White Helmets have been, quite often children go missing. or
Yep.
if there's been, for example, I think the bus bombing that we talked about on this program, there were some children that were not necessarily directly affected by the bombing itself, but some of the children disappeared and perhaps didn't come back. Is there evidence to suggest that that's what's happening to children that go missing? They're being taken away and having organs removed?
Well, there was a report put into the UN, I believe, last year, talking about 18,000 Syrian children who have had their organs removed. You're right about the Rashdin bombing, which was in April 2017. I believe that there are still 40 children missing from that suicide bombing. But if we remember back to those images, children, dead and dying children being piled up in the back of white helmet vehicles to be taken to Turkey. So yes, there is a very clear indication. And what we should also remember is that James Mesurier, the British intelligence founder of the White Helmets, was operating in Pristina in Kosovo in 1999. We've written about this at Mint Press, myself and Whitney Webb. And there, of course, he was responsible for the transformation of the terrorist and Albanian warlord KLA into the so-called Kosovo Protection Corps, who then carried out the organ trade activities in Kosovo, the transporting of particularly Serb civilians and children into Albania, where their organs were removed in what was called the Yellow Houses, although there were a number of other different coloured houses for different operations. So fast forward, we're seeing actually a repeat of the same operation that James Mesurier was effectively in charge of in Kosovo in '99. We're seeing it being repeated in Syria.
Okay, so it then becomes difficult for me to really, because I've been chasing the funding of the White Helmets from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office for nearly a year now. The first Freedom of Information request I put in, they simply refused to answer. There had been a parliamentary question answered by the Foreign Office saying that they were in receipt of quarterly financial reports from the White Helmets to explain exactly where British government money had been spent, but the Foreign Office refused to allow me to see any of those reports. So I went another approach and asked for the minutes of meetings, for example, where they were carrying out these reviews, because I wanted to see if there was any indication that they had actually done the reviews properly in the first place. And for 6 months, they simply ignored that question. That was then taken to the Information Commissioner, and the Information Commissioner made a notice, gave them a decision notice where they were obliged to respond, or they could have been held in contempt of court. They've now issued that response in the last couple of days, and they said that they don't hold the information in the form requested. So they haven't given any indication as to what form they do hold it in. So again, they're in breach of the Freedom of Information Act, which says that they've got to be helpful whenever they give their responses. Vanessa, it becomes very difficult to view the Foreign Office's position on this as being anything than they've got something to hide. And from what you're saying today, organ trafficking seems to be part of what it is that they do have to hide. And that must raise some pretty serious questions for the British government.
Well, it certainly should, and it should certainly raise some very serious questions for those Integrity Initiative members, media, government shills who've been defending and protecting the White Helmets universally, and of course attacking those who are seen as detractors of the White Helmets, who are described as genocide deniers or chemical weapon deniers, or of course Putin agents, Kremlin agents, and so on. My point of view is now, should these media operators be called organ trade apologists? Because the evidence that was presented, and this is in the UN Security Council, this is not in some back room, by the Russian mission itself, so at the highest possible level. And I have to say that today, Twitter, social media is eerily quiet. There is not one response. There is not. Prior to the event, Washington Post, a number of Bellingcat were putting out the usual, oh God, the Russians are attacking the white helmets. Today, there is nothing, absolutely. It's like a desert out there in Twitter. And so my sense is, yes, to a huge degree, among all the other crimes committed by the white helmets, of course, this is the one that they wanted to definitely hide.
Yeah. Okay, Vanessa, thank you very much for joining us. Stay with us if you would like to, but we shall move on now. Brian, let's move on to this. Foreign Affairs magazine, which of course the publication of the Council on Foreign Relations, and they're asking the question, who will run the world? And they're saying rising powers can delay provocation, but only for so long. And the bad news for the US and for peace and security in Asia is that China has now entered the beginning stages of a direct challenge to the US-led order. They go on to say if US leaders deem primacy in Asia worth protecting, they should brace themselves to the possibility that doing so may require the use of military force. Now, you have mentioned this document you're reading about the state of US military, Brian, but the US is not in a position to pursue a war with China. So the CFR must be equally off their heads, really, to suggest that that's something that should be considered.
Well, you've got this huge mismatch. The reality is that the United States military is in big trouble. That requires a sort of whole section in a UK column news, so we'll save that for 2019. But the document that I read was simply a demand that America should be prepared literally to take on the whole world. And one of the things it was obviously deeply concerned about is it was recognizing that America was incapable of going into a conflict in Eastern Europe and winning, and America was incapable of taking on the Chinese in the Pacific and winning. So it was almost shock horror. But that report linked back through to the Council on Foreign Relations itself, and also to the US Institute for Peace, which I found slightly ironic as the main document was absolutely saying we can't control the world unless we've got a big enough military.
David, have you got any thoughts on Foreign Affairs magazine's take on this?
It's not the key issue, but it does point towards the problem they're grappling with. But the solution is not going to be America doing it alone. That one won't fly, as Brian's just described.
Well, look, so a sort of related issue. You've published a post, an opinion piece on the UK column today towards a model of a deep state. Well, I mean, what has encouraged you to write this? Because you're trying to build a model of what the deep state looks like.
Build a model of what it looks like and what it's motivated by and what its objectives are, so that the sometimes apparently confusing and contradictory events can make more sense. A framework which allows the world to be understood a little better. That's what we're aiming for here. It shows, for example, why Trump saying that the place that US troops belong is the US is absolutely not on message. No, they're meant to be out policing the world. So that shows Donald Trump to be opposing these views, and it also suggests that that we've got not only the US but a reinvigorated and unified Europe. This is where EU military unification fits in, and a reset Russia is the direction they're trying to go. And if those three powers could be harnessed together, then you have enough to have authority over the whole globe, including China.
David, I'll just drop in there. In that document I was reading, the assessment of the status of the US military, it mentioned NATO several times. That's not surprising. There was not one mention of the European Union with respect to defence. I found this absolutely fascinating, that the American assessment was on America, it was on NATO, but it was as if the European Union did not exist. Fascinating.
Okay, let's move on to this. So this is the Islington Gazette, a local newspaper in Islington in London. And the headline is, Islington Council bans famous jazz musician accused of anti-Semitism from performing with the blockheads. And they say Islington Council has stopped a famous jazz musician accused of anti-Semitism performing on the basis that it might harm relationships with the borough's Jewish community. Council chiefs have stopped Gilad Atzmon, 55, from performing alongside Ian Drury's former band, the Blockheads, at the Islington Assembly Hall on Friday after a ticket holder said they feel unwelcome at the show owing to Gilad's views. Well, this morning I spoke to Gilad Atzmon and I began by asking him how this happened.
Yeah, so to start with, for those who do not know, I'm a pretty famous jazz musician. I'm playing all over the world. I'm a winner of many awards, including the BBC Jazz Awards. I'm also a writer, and it is very important to mention that despite the fact that I published, I think, 7 or 8 books, translated into 30 languages, published thousands of papers on Jewish identity, not once in my life was I even questioned by a single law enforcement authority about anything I've written or said or expressed. So I'm completely free of any or 8 crimes. I have 3 points on my license for speeding, I think.
Right, but Gilad, just you have to explain this to me because it's difficult for a non-Jew to understand this. How is it possible for somebody who's from the Jewish community to be accused of anti-Semitism? Is a Jew not allowed to criticize their own community? Is that not possible anymore?
It is not possible, and it is not possible for a while. And in fact, what we see, the tactics that are employed against me, I'm talking about the tactics, I don't try to claim that I'm as important. The tactics that are employed against me are very similar to the tactics that were employed all along Jewish history against Jesus Christ, exactly the same, against Baruch Spinoza, exactly the same, against Marx, in recent years against Israel Shamir and Norman Finkelstein and Chomsky. It is called, in Hebrew, it is called Cherem, and in English it is called excommunication. Every means, lying, duplicity, every means towards the destruction of a critical voice is valid. Now, what happened is that a single person who is actually, if you look at his name is Martin Rankoff. If you look at his Twitter feed or partly Instagram, I didn't even see it.
There's his Twitter page on screen at the moment.
Exactly.
Well, that's a pretty obvious header on his Twitter page there.
Yeah, it's a guy who used gruesome language, totally anti-Blair, totally anti-Corbyn. Sorry, he's probably pro-Blair. Anti-Corbyn, which is a legitimate position, but pretty, to my taste, I would say vile. He approached the Islington Council. Islington Council is a Labour council. And he told them, listen, this Gilad is an anti-Semite. He referred them to some Zionist Jewish outlets, outrageous stuff. The people in the council didn't bother to check who he was or who he is. They didn't bother to check what is the credibility of the sources. And within a day or two, the blockheads received a message that not the blockheads, the promoter of the event received a message from the council that unless Gilad is off the gig, the concert is cancelled. Now, this was an unlawful act. And the council actually was we're referring to clause 50 and 51, that basically 2 clauses that are there to prevent I don't know if you have them in front of you or can you present them. They are closed to prevent. They are there to prevent aid gatherings and neo-Nazi congregations. It had nothing to do with the blockades. It had nothing to do with the ban. It has nothing to do with me.
But Gilad, Gilad, aside from everything else, you were not there to make any kind of political statement. You weren't there to make any. You weren't there to make any speeches. You were there to play the saxophone. This was not a political meeting of any kind.
And in fact, when I play the saxophone, when I have a saxophone shoved into my mouth, this is the only time that I cannot explore my thought openly, so they actually should encourage me to play as much as possible. This is on a kind of the funny side of it. Anyway, we have now managed to become aware, thanks to this Martin Rankoff, of the letter that was sent by Richard Watts, email that was sent from Richard Watts, the council leader, a Labour guy, to Martin Rankoff, and he basically promised him everything. Don't worry, it's Hanukkah with our donuts, and Gilad Atzmon is off. When the blockheads realized what was going on, and the clause that was used, they were really upset. They sent a letter. I myself hired a legal firm to deal with it, and it was pretty clear that we have a very strong case to judicial review. By the way, we still have.
Oh, okay, so you're considering this possibility of a judicial review, and you've written to the council on that basis. Now, the council has then hired a law firm of their own. So who would that be?
Okay, so this is an incredible story in itself. And I will reveal more and more. And I encourage every UK citizen to put into action the Freedom of Information request in regard to all trading ins and out, and especially the legal firms, to know, and we want an expose of how much it cost for the council to hire one of Britain's most expensive legal firms. We are talking about Simpkins. And this is the lawyer that were working on the Cliff Richard case, and almost brought the BBC into bankruptcy. The legal fee were extortionate. So I want to know, really, how is it possible that a council that is crying on a daily basis, and you can look at the Islington Gazette, on the fact that it is bankrupt. We read report about a council that is pushing out, evicting disabled people and homeless people to the street this Christmas. How is it possible that this Richard Watts hires the most expensive company, and we couldn't know how much it could cost, but I realized, and this is informal, that a judicial review could cost, up to 40, 50, even 60,000 quid. I think that quite a lot of disabled people could enjoy, probably 1,000 quid a month, 60 months of accommodation, safe accommodation. So we realized with my legal team, at least for the time being, that we have so much materials that exposing the council in bad light that the best tactics at this moment was to bring the story out, to bring all the information, so the Brits can decide for themselves, rather than applying for the discretion of a judge. And we don't trust, and many people don't trust the judicial system in this country anymore, and it is very unfortunate. It's a big problem. I still think that we can trust the common sense of Brits. Now, a friend of mine issued a petition. I think that today it will be probably 4,000 or 5,000 people. And until now, this morning, I saw that it's more than 3,000. It's just 2 days. hundreds, if not thousands, of emails and complaints were issued with the council. And apparently, one Zionist Jew can push the council to behave unlawfully. But 1,000 letters of good, well-meaning Brits cannot make the council admit its mistake and get its action on track.
Okay, now Gilad, I'm afraid we're right out of time, but I just want to put your website up here, Gilad Atzmon. What's the web address for this?
It is gilad.co.uk, and when you get to my webpage, just look for the magazines. This is where you find my latest writings.
Yes, okay, but for this, I mean, here we've got one article here which covers this particular story, and it's headlined "British Labour Zionism more likely," and you've got a couple of others appearing on there, I think. So
I just have a funny story for you. I just realized today that 2 years ago, the Labour Council in Islington actually banned pork from being served in schools. So I think that we are entitled to say first they came for pork and nobody said a thing. And now they came for Gilad Atzmon and everyone went bonkers.
Yes. Okay, well, hopefully that's what happens. Okay, well, look, thank you very much, Gilad. We will keep in touch and let people know how this goes. But if you want... Okay, so let me bring David in first and just give me your thoughts on this whole situation, because it seems incredible to me that that we're now banning people playing the saxophone on the basis of one person's email.
One email, and there's a pattern here where there is a reaction by the authorities, which is craven, and it happens again and again. But the background to this is even more incredible. As more of this comes out via Gilad's website, it's going to run and run, because essentially what they've done is they've said, yes, we're going to ban Gilad Atzmon by using anti-neo-Nazi type clause in the contract. And then when that was explored, basically the council came back and said Atzmon's very presence, his presence there with a saxophone in his mouth would cause such consternation and anger and division amongst the communities, and anger on the part of the Jewish community, that we have an obligation to promote harmony and prevent this happening. So if you criticize, in this case, elements of Jewishness or Zionism or anything, it's actually not Zionism he criticizes, but elements of Jewish culture, in this case, then your mere presence is impossible to allow. And then they go on and say, well, we've considered his right to free expression and his right to earn a living, but that doesn't factor in the decision. We've thought about it, but no, he's banned. It's just an extraordinary piece of correspondence.
I see Vanessa's still with us. Vanessa, I don't know if you've got any view on this or on the wider issue of the shutdown of free speech at the moment, but this is an incredible example of it. Can't hear you.
No, I mean, we're seeing this across the board. We're seeing the recent dismissal of Professor Tim Anderson, for example, in Australia. Academics are under attack. The recent attack on Professor Piers Robinson in Huffington Post by Chris York, who's obviously been instrumentalised to attack any academics or actually any detractors of UK Foreign Office policy. We're at a very dangerous tipping point where effectively, if these censors, if these machines of censorship are allowed to ride roughshod over free speech, it'll be very hard to get it back.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Vanessa. Now let's move on, David, to this and bring us up to date on what happened in the courts in Scotland over the case brought against John Smith and the Common Law Court up there.
Yeah, John Smith and Robert Sproul attended court on Wednesday this past week. There was a large turnout of people to support them. Quite a lot of people have travelled up from Liverpool and other places in England to support them. and they set about defending their position. Now, the case is that a common law court had found that Scottish sheriffs had contravened the necessary standards of lawfulness and had found against them, and the sheriffs was served documentation from the common law court. The sheriffs are claiming that this has caused them great anxiety, fear, and alarm, and is therefore a criminal act. And Robert Sproul and John Smith have been arrested and been tried on that basis. Now, there's a couple of very interesting things here. The view is that the common law court does not. The view from the sheriffs and the Scottish officials is that the common law court has no standing, does not exist, has no weight or credibility at all, and yet correspondence from that court caused them fear and alarm. They described that correspondence as Toy Town paperwork, and yet it caused them fear and alarm. It seems tremendously contradictory. So perhaps when the court next convenes, we'll get to the bottom of that. And there was one very interesting thing that was said, and I quoted here in the slide. John Smith asked the witness, Sheriff William Ireland, "Do you believe that the people are allowed to convene their own courts?" And Sheriff Ireland responded, "No." And then the sheriff presiding, Sheriff Bovey, he stated that you don't need to answer that. And the witness said, "Well, it's too late. You have my answer." So there you go. The courts do not, the people have no right to establish their own courts. Well, what are the courts then? If they're not established on the basis of the people and the people's adherence to the law, of what basis are they presiding over us? It was a troubling comment for me as to what this indicates that the people who sit on the benches believe.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll just add to that. We know that at the moment that Lords, members of the House of Lords, have been asking key questions about the Constitution. They're talking about law. They're also mentioning the word treason. So I think there is at the start of real questioning by people about what the Constitution and what the real law in this country is. So I think we're going to be seeing more about this. But if you haven't researched it, research common law. This seems to be the thing which so many establishment figures are frightened of, and indeed so many people who claim that they're legally trained. Well, why do we need proper law? Let's just remind ourselves as we approach Christmas of people who are not going to have such good Christmases. And a protest, a very small but I think poignant protest for Melanie Shaw's taken place outside Westminster. So posters have been put up. Also this gentleman here with his free Melanie Shaw banner. I don't know who this gentleman is, but I'm going to thank him for taking the time and effort to keep Melanie's name in front of the camera. And I'm going to say, at the moment, we do not know where Melanie Shaw is. We believe that she's still in HM prison style, but it is possible that she's now been moved to some form of protected psychiatric institution. But this is Britain in 2018, people simply disappearing into the prison gulag. And why is she there? Well, the UK column says, and I certainly say, that this is because the deep state is worried about what Melanie Shaw knows about child abuse affecting politicians and other senior members of the establishment. But of course, it's not just child abuse that's being closed down. We've also got David Noakes in prison at the moment. Now, David broke the law. What was he trying to do? He was trying to help people with cancer. He's been put in a particularly hard prison where we know he's already been very badly treated. What was he trying to do? Help people with cancer. This is the reaction of the state, the system, and ultimately the British government. And we can add in here Sabine McNeill. Sabine's already been in prison for some 9 months. She's not going to be sentenced till the 9th of January. What has Sabine McNeill been trying to do but expose establishment child abuse? So if you're one of the overseas viewers, you're watching from the United States or elsewhere in Europe or wherever it is, The reality of UK at the moment is that we stand on the world stage trying to lecture other countries and other leaders of countries as to how they should run their countries, how they should behave, what democracy is. But we've got these vast double standards by the British government, which includes the abuse of child abuse whistleblowers. David, just very brief comment, but we are in immensely dangerous times in this country. And as Gilad has said, the state will shut you down if they simply decide they don't like you as a person.
And this is why the legal system, why the law is at the heart of our nation. The courts are at the heart of our nation in many ways, because if they are corrupt, then all protection goes and the people are made into merchandise.
Okay.
Right. Now, Integrity Initiative, because, well, today, Piers Robinson and the Syria Working Group have pushed out their latest briefing paper on that, and so we'll provide a link to that in the description below this this video when we publish it later on. But in the meantime, David, aside from our own research and your articles and my article, the Canary have been doing some stuff here as well. So apparently, Chris Williamson has attempted to get into the building that the Integrity Initiative and the Institute for Statecraft appear to be actually inhabiting at the moment. What happened to him?
Well, it didn't go well. He knocked on the door and confirmed that the person he was talking to was a member of the Institute for Statecraft, and then he introduced himself as Chris Williamson, MP for Derby, and the person said, "Oh, I'll need to get Dan," and the door was closed, and
that would be Dan Lafayette, would it?
Well, so, yes, this has been confirmed by the Canary that Dan Lafayette was there. And Dan Lafayette took one look at Chris Williamson and slammed the door in his face. And that was the end of that conversation. Now, I would point out that you would think an organisation dedicated to effective communication would manage their own communications a little more effectively than this, but apparently not. So it's a very interesting article.
David, we've got to say well done to Chris Williamson, MP, because he's stuck with this over the last few weeks. He's asked a number of parliamentary questions. He's managed to get some answers to those parliamentary questions, which actually give a clue to the other freedom of information effort that I've been working on with the Foreign Commonwealth Office, and that is the program of counter disinformation and media development headed up by Andy Price. So he's managed to get a little bit of information out on that. So he's doing quite a good job.
Oh, he certainly is. The parliamentary questions were tremendously helpful. And here he's putting himself out there. And I mean, it's salutary that a journalist was, shall we say, quite robustly asked to leave when he went to look for the premises of the Institute for Statecraft, and now an MP has had the door slammed in his face. So it's very clear that this organisation does not want public scrutiny. Public funds, but not public scrutiny.
Yeah, we're going to come on to one other aspect of the Canary article in 1 second, but just before we do, Vanessa, do you have any thoughts on because you're obviously watching what the Russians are saying on a range of different issues? Have you any thoughts on what they might view of, or how they might view this whole thing and the leaks that have come out?
Well, I mean, I think to a huge extent they're viewing it as a degree of vindication. I mean, I think, you know, what is extraordinary about these leaks for me, and I haven't had the time to fully read the Syria Working Group updated briefing yet. I was sort of halfway through before the program started. But this threatens the very foundation of disinformation and misinformation and the whole behavioural insight complex that, of course, was birthed in the UK. And we're seeing stalwarts of that entire intelligence operation being knocked over like dominoes. I mean, I don't think, I'm thinking back in history, but I can't remember a time in my lifetime where we've seen such mass exposure on this scale.
Yeah.
This is a
Well,
good
long
point.
may it continue. But David, we just did pick up on the Canary. Well, let's bring this on screen. I thought this was fascinating. A little note at the end of their article. It said, "Get involved, write to your MP and demand they seek further answers into the activities of the Institute for Statecraft and the Integrity Initiative. Brackets, always be respectful when you write letters. They're much more likely to be effective when clear, to the point and respectful." So I'm just going to add in, this sounds to have come straight out of the UK column. And I'm delighted that Canary has now picked up on the fact, one, we need to do the investigative journalism. Well done to the Canary on this occasion. But I'm also delighted to see them picking up on our wider advice. Now, it's Christmas. We thought we would end on a humorous note. What better place to go than the BBC? And I couldn't resist this one, which is a BBC article from a couple of days ago, where they said that those nasty Russians had weaponized humour. Yes, this is a real story from the BBC. Humour and ridicule were a key part of Moscow's response when the UK said it was highly likely that Russia was behind the poisoning of former spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia in Salisbury. Russian officials and media figures have since tried to turn the English phrase highly likely into a mocking catchphrase that implies Russia is being blamed for everything. With the flimsiest of evidence, you're laughing, Mike. This is the BBC. It should be taken very seriously. They have enlisted a range of popular figures from English literature, such as Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot, Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, to ridicule British allegations of Russian involvement in the poisoning, which they denounce as unfounded. And I found this a little bit later in this amazing article. Ben Nimmo, an Atlantic Council researcher on Russian disinformation, told the BBC that attempts to create funny memes were part of the strategy as disinformation for the information age. This is getting into complete nonsense speak. David, I'm going to just give you 30 seconds, but let's have a look at Nimmo. Here he is. This is his Twitter page where he's got lots of anti-Russian stuff. But the most amusing things that I found on it was his claim that Ofcom, who's recently found against Russia today, is independent. Well, if you want to go and have a look on the Ofcom site yourself, you'll see that there are ex-government people, bankers, media peoples. To try and claim that Ofcom is independent of the British government is as ridiculous as saying the BBC is independent of the government. David, the BBC is falling apart here.
Well, you have to value the analysis from Ben Nimmo, Brian. You really must, because the Institute of Statecraft and the Integrity Initiative value it very much. They value it to the tune of £2,500 per month consultancy fee. Although I did see some months it was £5,000. So that's high quality and valuable stuff you have there. We can put a number on it. The fact that the Russians, the fact that for months we've been just creasing ourselves with what's coming out of the Russian embassy, and the fact that the BBC can't handle the humour is just wonderful. It's glorious.
Well, it
Do
gets
you
better.
remember? Do you remember the BBC Monty Python World's Funniest Joke skit? Look it up on YouTube. Right, the World's Funniest Joke was weaponized. It was made into a weapon. In the 1970s, that was light entertainment. That was hard news.
Yeah, it was. Well, I've got more on this, and we're all smiling, which is absolutely right for our last news of 2018. But here's the lady that wrote the article, Olga Robinson, no relation to your good self, Mike, of
Absolutely
course.
not.
Senior journalist at BBC Monitoring. So here we've got a foreign and Commonwealth British government-backed arm of the BBC reporting this nonsense about Russia. If you have a look at her background, she was actually trained at Moscow University. So she's been picked up by British spooks, and she's now acting against her own country. I assume she's Russian. She might be Eastern European. Olga's not a very common English name, that's for sure. She says she specialises in information manipulation and disinformation techniques. Are those the ones she's using on Britain? I don't know. And let's follow it through, because here's some of the BBC's work. They were crowing recently that a Russian cargo ship had gone aground off the Cornish coast. here's my little dig. Where did the sorry, I can't do it. Where did the BBC reporting get them? Well, let's have a look to what sort of comments have come up. Never believe what you see on TV. That's just a bathtub with a toy ship in it. So a cargo ship with no cargo, is this a poor attempt to spy or something? Sink it, it's a spy ship. BBC, was Putin behind it? Blame Putin, it's what you usually do. I haven't made these up, they're all posted on the video concerned. So that's why my vodka wasn't in stock at Asda. Good news, it has now been towed out of danger and is now back on its way with the newly acquired spy data. Send it back with Novichok. BBC have just released a statement that the main cause of this incident is Brexit, aided by Trump and Putin. And finally, King Vladimir, come land on our shores and save us from the far left BBC. So it seems to me that the Russians went aground but recovered. The BBC has been sunk in ridicule and laughter. And we're going to say to you at the end of 2018, look, make next year a really great year by helping to bring down the BBC propaganda machine. You should be using ridicule and laughter to do it, and you can have a great time in doing so. So there we are. I don't think we need to say any more. The BBC, I think, has just lost the plot.
Well, let's just get some final comment for 2018 from Vanessa and David. Vanessa, let's start with you.
Well, I think it's highly likely that the comedy will continue into 2019 from the BBC. But I'd also just like to point out, what world are we living in? The Institute of Statecraft, BBC monitoring, Integrity Initiative. I mean, we're just entering into kind of the weirdest, most hallucinatory bunny hole that I don't think any of us could have imagined a year ago. It's extraordinary. Long may it last. It's exposure.
That's hashtag BBC bunny hole.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. David, finally.
Oh, it's been a good year, right? 2017 was a bit grim. This has been a hoot. We've discovered enormous amounts of information. Yeah, looking forward to 2019. Okay,
thank you, David. Right, I just want to end off by giving a huge thanks to you, David Scott, to David Ellis, to Alex Thompson, to Martin Edwards for all the research and articles this year, Patrick Henningson, all at Alternate Current Radio, who are carrying UK column in the United States, to Ned Pamphilin, who's providing those fantastic images, those cartoons that are appearing on the UK column news programme, Jez, who provides the daily running orders that go underneath the news programme, Azra for her continuing stream of emails with absolutely fantastic information, all our members and contributors, including Vanessa Beeley, of course. So thank you very much to everybody for everything this year. And just to finally say that UK Column News will return on Monday, the 7th of December. That should say 7th of January, 2019.
Wow.
My goodness me.
Wow, how did that happen?
I don't know. Well, there you go. At least I got the year right.
That means the whole of the news that we've reported is fake. Mike.
Yes.
Okay.
So Monday, the 7th of January, we'll be back.
What we'd like to say is thank you very much to all the people who sent cards. We've been inundated with Christmas cards. Clearly this one's come from north of the border. There's a sporran here. We've also got some edible products. Oh, sorry, no, they're deer, reindeer. We've got a Merry Brexit, which obviously was a very topical Christmas card, and a couple of others, but there are piles of them. So thank you very much to everybody who sent us a Christmas card.
And we will be back in January.
See you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.